one that we've done, just doing a series 1 year apart. Now, if you weren't here last year on Mother's Day or the year before, and you say, well, I don't know what you talked about, don't worry about it, because those who were here don't remember either, so it's really no big deal. And that's not an insult, because I'm not even sure. I'd have to go back and check my notes, if you know what I'm saying. So this message certainly would stand on its own, not having necessarily been connected with the others, because what I've done is tried to take the verses of Proverbs 31 and put the verses that have something in common to form one primary theme. And so you can see today talking about the mother's relationship to her family. And so we're going to begin at Proverbs 31:11, and then we'll drop down to verse 21. And the writer says, the heart of her husband safely trusts her, so he will have no lack of gain. And then going down to verse 21, he says she is not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household is clothed with scarlet. She makes tapestry for herself, her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land, and she makes linen garments and sells them and supplies sashes for the merchants. As you read through the scriptures, one of the things that you have probably noticed is that we really don't get a great deal of detail about the biblical characters in their childhood. We get a few glimpses here and there, like Moses when he was a baby, or Samuel when he was with Eli, or even with Jesus. We get one glimpse when he was 12 years old in the 2nd chapter of Luke. But by and large, we know very little about the day in, day out lifestyles of the children in Bible times, and especially their interaction with their parents and all of that. So what do? We make stuff up. And people write novels and things like that on topics similar to those. And we make up some funny things too. And I came across some ideas that someone put together about things that mothers of people in the Bible may have said when their kids were little. Okay, you'll get where I'm going with this in a minute. For example, you wonder if David's mom ever said to him when he was a kid, David, quit playing with that slingshot in the house. You're going to kill somebody with that thing one day. Maybe so. Or Joshua's mom. Did she ever say, Joshua, quit blowing that trumpet so loud. The walls of the house are starting to shake. Or Noah's mom. No, Noah, we can't keep them. Will you quit bringing stray animals to the house? This is one of my favorite. Now, this is kind of brutal. But you wonder if Judas's mom said, Judas, have you been in my purse again? We'll never know, but you wonder. But the Bible is full of great Bible heroes, right? And we often refer to them for life lessons, and of course, for most of them, their lives were shaped by godly women who taught them the principles of the Lord, raised them in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, and taught them the ways of the Bible. And that has been the root of the lives of many, many people who've grown up and have become followers of Jesus and servants in his kingdom. So we're going to look at some qualities in Proverbs 31 concerning a mother's role and a mother's relationship with her family that are very important. And incidentally, these are not just important for moms, so guys, don't just tune me out and say, oh, this is a mother's sermon, but it's for all of us, whether we're moms, dads, males, females. All of these qualities are very important for us to consider. The first one is this: the biblical mother is considered trustworthy by her family. Verse 11 of Proverbs 31 says that the heart of her husband trusts in her. So she is trustworthy, which happens to be one of the most important qualities that any person can develop. Wouldn't you agree with that? If a person is trustworthy, that is of tremendous value. In fact, we really cannot be people of integrity, people that are used greatly in God's kingdom, if we're not trustworthy individuals. I mean, you've heard people say something like this: oh, I could trust him with my life, or I could trust her with anything. But what's that saying? That's talking about somebody who's trustworthy. No matter what I ask them to do, or no matter what I put in their hands, or no matter what responsibility I give them, I can trust them that they're going to do it, or they're going to see it through, or they're going to be honest about it. I just trust them. And that's a trustworthy individual. I encourage you to develop, if you haven't already, trustworthiness in your life. I mean, we cannot overemphasize how important that is. And if you think, well, maybe right now you're not as trustworthy as you ought to be, maybe people don't see you quite that way, well, start working on it. It certainly doesn't develop in a day, but it develops through habits that you build in your life that make you trustworthy. And if you are trustworthy now, don't do anything to jeopardize it. Keep going. Keep being a trustworthy individual. Now you might say, well, how do I become a trustworthy person? Or how do I ensure that I'm a trustworthy person? Well, I was reading an article this week where an author talked about 3 characteristics of a trustworthy individual. We're going to put those up on the screen now. Reliability, competency, and honesty. That if you want to be a trustworthy person where people can trust you, then you need to develop these 3 qualities in your life. You need to be reliable, competent, and honest. And what's interesting about this is that you can't just have one of them, or even 2 of them. If you're going to be trustworthy, you have to have all 3 of them present in your life. Why is that? Well, think about this. If a person is reliable and honest, but they're not competent. And if you're a reliable person and you're honest, that's great. But if you're not competent, if I got a kid, I'm not going to let you watch him. Because you might say, I don't know what happened to him. They ran off. I don't know. I'm not very good at this, If you're not competent in something, then no, you're not going to be trustworthy in that area. So you have to have some level of competency in a particular matter. Or if you're reliable and you're competent, you're good at stuff, but you're not honest. Well, I'm not going to leave my cash and credit cards laying out where you can see them. See what I'm saying? You're not trustworthy if you're not honest. You may have 2 of those qualities, but if you're not an honest person, then you're not trustworthy. Because we don't know what you might take or what you might lie about. Or let's look at the other combination. What if you're competent and you're honest, but you're not reliable? You never follow through on things. You're never on time. Nobody knows that they can count on you to do what you're going to say. They may promise something somebody will say about you, but they never deliver. Then you're not going to be trustworthy, you see. It doesn't matter how good you are. It doesn't matter how honest you are and sincere you are. If you're not reliable, if you're not somebody that a person can count on to carry through on things, then no one's going to consider you trustworthy. They're going to say, he's a great person, or she's a great person. But boy, you ask her to do something, they forget. You just can't count on them. They're just not trustworthy. So that's why it's important that you have to have all 3 of these qualities. You need to be a reliable person, someone who comes through with what you're going to talk about and do. You need to be a competent person, and you need to be an honest person. And you develop those 3 traits, then people will look at you and say, man, you can trust that person with anything. And that's a wonderful quality to have. And I believe that God wants every one of his children to be a trustworthy individual, don't you? That's a person that really seeks to do good for other people, someone who's trustworthy. In fact, all adults ought to be. Jim Cymbala, you might know that name. He's an American pastor. He wrote a very famous book a few years ago called Fresh Wind, Fresh Fire. And he tells about when he was a kid, his dad left the family, just deserted him, ran off. And Jim Cymbala, he was just a young boy. And he's writing in this book now as an adult, Fresh Wind, Fresh Fire, and he explains how that impacted him. And here's what he said. He said, if you couldn't count on grown-ups to do the right thing, then what was life all about anyway? I was shattered, he said. And you see, that's through the eyes of a child. As a little boy, he looked up to his mom and dad like anyone else. And he said, my dad left our family, and I thought, if you can't count on grown-ups to do the right thing. Now, I know for us who are grown-ups, we all know that grown-ups don't always do the right thing, and that's sad. But what Jim Cymbala said underscores how much kids are looking up to us to do the right thing, which means we need to strive harder and harder to do the right thing, to be trustworthy, that we will live our lives in such a manner with integrity and rightness, that kids will look at us and see that we are an example of what it means to be trustworthy. So strive for trustworthiness in your life. Whether you're a mom or dad, male, female, not a dad, not a mom, doesn't matter. But particularly as a child of God, be a trustworthy person. The second quality of a mother and her relationship with her family is that a biblical mother is a provider for her family. In Proverbs 31, beginning of verse 21, it says she's not afraid of snow for her household. She must not live in Oklahoma. But all her household, the reason that she's not afraid is because she said she has all her household clothed with scarlet. She makes tapestry for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. She makes linen garments and sells them, supplies sashes for the merchants. I know when we think about a person who provides for the family, we generally talk about the man. That's the traditional role. But what I'm talking about here, and I think what Proverbs 31 is talking about, it's not whether who's holding down the job and all that. I know today we have many women who work outside the home and many who don't, who, of course, all work inside the home. We know that. But whether you have a job outside the home or not, I believe what God's getting at here is that a mother still provides tremendously for the home. Isn't that right? Whether she brings a paycheck home or not. You think about it, all the ways a mom provides. She provides clothing, and she provides emotional support. In fact, most of the time, a mother provides emotional support far better than the dad does. You know, just a mom just has that compassionate heart for the child. And mothers just provide so many things at home that the dad just can't, because we're different. Now, I'm not saying the dad is not important, because I've preached sermons about the necessity of a father and how important dads are. And they're both important. God created the family that way. Men contribute things that women don't, and women contribute things that men don't, and that's why God put them together as a family. And so women can provide for children things that they specifically need from a mother. And the video we watched this morning showed many of the roles that a woman plays that are just almost endless, it seems. You know, they're nurses, they're maids, they're doctors, they're event planners, they're taxi cab drivers, they're counselors, advisors, teachers, everything you can imagine a mother does. And I would say that a mom, in many cases, most cases really, is the glue that holds the family together. I think many of us have experienced that. You know, without the mom, it's like the house just falls apart. Saturday Evening Post one time had a cartoon, and this little girl answers the phone because it rained, you see. And so she picked up the phone, and the little girl says this. She says, "No, Mom's not home right now. Andy and Charlie and Teresa and Dad and the dog and me are all home alone." And that's how it feels, isn't it? You know, if Mom's not in the mix, everything's falling apart. And that's the necessity of a mother right there. I mean, she just brings the family together, and I think she's the glue that holds it all together. And so, from a man to all of you mothers, all you guys out there, you need to hear this too. We got to owe a great debt of gratitude for the wives and mothers in our lives. All right, one more piece that I want to share with you concerning the mother, and that is the biblical mother is a supporter of her husband. In verse 22, verse 23, her husband is known at the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. I believe what the writer is talking about here is the support that the husband receives from his wife. And again, I know that a husband is to be the supporter of his wife, and there are scriptures in there for that. But this is Mother's Day, and we're looking at Proverbs 31, so I want to talk about the support that a mother, or a wife in this case, provides for her husband. I read a story about this one lady who was teaching a seminar to a group of women about marriage. Now, you women will appreciate this. And during her presentation, she said, "How many of you women want to mother your husband?" Well, of course, no woman wants to mother her husband, But one lady in the back kind of enthusiastically raised her hand. And the speaker stopped for a minute, and she said, "You do want to mother your husband?" And the woman got a little embarrassed, and she said, "Oh, you said mother. I thought you said smother." Yeah, I think more hands would have gone up, don't you? Here's what I believe the Bible teaches for husbands and wives, and this is in a godly, biblical, ideal marriage. And it's what we all ought to strive for. I believe that the husband ought to be the wife's biggest support and cheerleader, and the wife needs to be her husband's biggest support and cheerleader. That they ought to encourage one another and not get jealous of the other's success or accomplishment, but instead spur the other one on to great accomplishments themselves and compliment one another. I know you've heard the expression, behind every great man is a woman. Do you believe that? I'll tell you what, I've known a lot of great men, we all have, and I don't know of any example where a man accomplished by himself. There's always a great woman. And I think about my own life. Now, I'm not a great man, I know that, nowhere near it, but when I think about my own life, and some of you heard my testimony, but you hadn't heard this part. In fact, hardly anyone knows this, but when I went off to college, I was 21 in Oklahoma. I'd gone to Marshall University for a few years, but then I was called to ministry. And so I transferred to Mid-America Bible College, now Christian University. And Cindy was there. She was 18. That's where we met. I was 21. And I was scared to death to preach. I knew God had called me to preach. But, I was your natural introvert. Don't put me in front of people. I just couldn't handle it. It's like I don't want to do it. But you know who encouraged me to preach? It was this young lady. She encouraged me to preach. She said she knew I could do it. She said, you can do it. You should trust in the Lord. And you don't expect to be, some great TV preacher today or tomorrow. I mean, it takes time to develop any type of skill or any type of gift. But anytime you preach, you would come up, I'd always try to change the subject. And she lined up an opportunity for me to preach. Actually, one of the first times was in Texas, in Wichita Falls. It was poor people. And if it wasn't for her, I don't know if I ever would have gotten up in front of people. Not only that, but when we met, she was the one with all the Bible knowledge, She had gone to church her whole life, was there every time the doors were open. She was mentored by two great pastors, Lynn Higgins and George Golden. And you've heard me tell you before, I think, that when I was a teenager, I didn't go to church a whole lot. And that was my foolishness. And so I didn't know as much about the Bible. She could tell you any Bible story, and there were people and stories in the Old Testament I didn't even know about, that she told me about. And I'll tell you where I was in my knowledge level. And when I was 19 years old, still living at home, and I went to Sunday school class. And it was a young adult class. My teacher's name was Dallas Blankenship. And we were talking about the first chapter of the Gospel of Mark, where it talks about how John the Baptist came, and he was saying that Jesus was going to come, and he'll be powerful, and he's so worthy that I, myself, am not even worthy to bend down and untie his sandals. Well, I made a comment during class that I said, Mark, because he was the writer of the gospel, was very humble, to have made that statement, I didn't know it was John the Baptist. I thought it was Mark. I mean, any preacher who's gone Bible 101 ought to know it's John the Baptist who said that, not Mark. And my Sunday school teacher was very kind and gracious and corrected me that it was John the Baptist. In fact, Mark was just a boy when Jesus was active in his ministry. He wasn't even an adult. And so Mark was talking about John the Baptist, and I didn't know that. That's where my knowledge was at that point. And so I'm very grateful. I just wanted to share that, because you wouldn't know that Cindy was so instrumental in that development time in my life, and has continued to be now for 31 plus years of marriage. But I want to close with this story. Half of you will love this story, and the other half of you won't. But there was a man named Thomas Wheeler who told this story about himself. He at one time was the CEO of a life insurance company, very well-to-do, as you would expect. And he and his wife were coming home after having been out of town, and they were driving along the interstate, getting close to their hometown, but they were running out of gas. And so they knew they needed to stop and get some gasoline, so they pull off the interstate, and there was this rundown gas station, just one pump, paint chipping everywhere and all this all over the place. And they pull in there, and a gas attendant, comes out to pump their gas. For you young people, there used to be full-service gas stations where you come out and check your oil and put the gas in your car. And so this attendant comes out to put gas in the car. And Mr. Wheeler gets out, and he's kind of walking around the building, stretching. They've been in the car for a while. He's kind of stretching his legs. And when he comes back around, he sees that his wife is in kind of a lively conversation with the gasoline attendant, like they knew each other or something, So after a minute or so, he pays for the gas, and as they're getting back in the car, The gasoline station attendant says to Mrs. Wheeler, "Well, it's nice seeing you again. Take care." And so Mr. Wheeler and his wife get back in the car and they're driving down the road, and he says to her, "So you knew that guy?" And she said, "Yeah, we went to high school together. In fact," she said, "we dated for a whole year while we were in high school." And Mr. Wheeler kind of smiles. Thomas Wheeler smiles, and he thinks to himself, in fact, he says to her, "Well, it's a good thing I came along. Because if I hadn't come along, you'd be married to a gas station attendant instead of being married to the CEO of a company." And then she started laughing. She smiled. She said, "Oh dear, you've got it all wrong. If you hadn't come along, that guy back there would be a CEO and you'd be back there pumping gas." I can't tell that story on Father's Day. But let me say something to you guys out there. We will never know, we will never understand the full value that these women in our lives have poured into us. And we ought to be very grateful. And we ought to be humble in our relationship with them and lift them up and value them, because they have lives far harder than what we would ever know. Far harder than what we would ever know. And I know, we guys think we got it tough sometimes, and we do. But, these women who have taken care of us and guided us and cared for us and are caring for us, pour value into them because they more than deserve it. And you probably wouldn't be where you are today if it weren't for women in your life who built you up. And to you ladies, we honor you today. We love you. And may you continue to have a heart toward God, because it's only as you're directed by His Holy Spirit that you can really pour into your kids' hearts and in the hearts of others what God needs for them to be directed and guided by His hand. Let's stand together as we pray. Our Lord